They fenced off my 40-acre ranch with an 8-foot steel wall, $80,000 of fresh galvanized iron still hot from the welders, blocking my driveway forever. HOA President Vivian Ashworth stood smirking, designer heels sinking into my gravel, clipboard raised like a scepter.
Mr. Steele, your cattle ruin our elegance. This gate stays locked until every cow is gone.
Dust choked the air. Diesel lingered. My ranch, the land I'd built my life on, stolen in one arrogant afternoon. But while they were busy playing God, I wasn't sitting idle. I'd already made one quiet, calculated purchase, the one piece of property they never saw coming, the piece that controls the only entrance gate to their entire 200-home subdivision. Every SUV, Tesla, delivery truck, all dependent on my gate. They locked me out? Just wait until I lock them out. Worst HOA horror story? Spill in the comments. My name's Garrett Steele, and I'm a third-generation rancher in Clearwater Valley, Colorado. 52 years old, weathered hands that still reach for Sarah's coffee cup every morning. Lost my wife 18 months ago to cancer. And this 40-acre spread isn't just land. It's the only thing keeping me sane. The sweet smell of alfalfa and the rough texture of fence wire remind me I'm still alive. My grandfather built every fence post by hand when this valley was nothing but cattle and common sense. Then came progress. In 2010, developers discovered our charming rural setting and decided it needed improvement. Meadowbrook Estates sprouted around my ranch like expensive weeds, 200 McMansions filled with folks who wanted rural views without rural realities. The subdivision has one peculiar design flaw, a single main entrance. The developer cut costs by funneling all 200 homes through one access road past Frank Mueller's 2-acre plot. Frank was my grandfather's drinking buddy, an old German farmer who understood strategic positioning better than most generals. 6 months ago, Frank decided to sell. Too old for farming, kids moved to Denver. That's when I learned HOA President Vivian Ashworth had been circling like a vulture, trying to buy his land through some shell company. Vivian Ashworth, 48 years of corporate lawyer wrapped in designer clothes and weaponized entitlement. The clicking of her heels on my gravel sounds like a typewriter drafting eviction notices. She drives a white BMW that's never seen mud and carries that clipboard like it contains nuclear launch codes. Here's the thing about old property deeds. They're full of legal landmines from a simpler time. Frank's 2-acre plot came with exclusive rights to control the subdivision's entrance gate operations buried in 1962 easement language. Most people would overlook it, but I'd learned to read contracts the hard way after Sarah's medical bills taught me that details matter. Original easement agreements often supersede modern HOA covenants because they're recorded at the county level with superior legal standing. Always research easements before buying property. They can grant surprising powers over neighboring developments. While Vivian was busy filing harassment complaints about my cattle, I made Frank a cash offer he couldn't refuse. Bought his plot for exactly what she'd offered, plus enough extra to send Frank to Arizona in style. The satisfaction of outbidding a lawyer with her own tactics? Priceless. The property deed arrived thick as a phone book. Buried in the legal language was one beautiful phrase: exclusive right to control vehicular access gate operations for Meadowbrook Estates subdivision. Every resident's daily commute now depended on my goodwill. Vivian had been systematically targeting me since Sarah's funeral, because nothing says neighborly compassion like attacking a widower. Noise violations for roosters crowing at dawn. Health complaints about agricultural odors. Environmental concerns about cattle near the creek that's fed livestock for 80 years without killing anyone. Her harassment escalated when she realized my ranch sat on premium development land worth millions. 4 subdivision properties in her investment portfolio, all leveraged with adjustable mortgages, all banking on property values rising 15% if she could eliminate the unsightly agricultural operations. The breaking point came when her brother-in-law, some environmental consultant from Boulder, wrote a report claiming my cattle posed imminent contamination risks. Pure fiction, but scientific enough to fool bureaucrats. The bitter taste of injustice mixed with the metallic tang of fear as I realized how far she'd go. That bogus report gave her the ammunition for an emergency HOA meeting. Public safety concerns. Unanimous vote from her hand-picked board of real estate investors masquerading as concerned neighbors. While I was at the Denver cattle auction, Her contractors invaded with steel fencing and legal documents. The grinding sound of power tools violated my land like an industrial assault. 8 feet of galvanized barrier, professionally installed, completely blocking ranch access. I came home to find my life's work imprisoned behind their steel curtain, with Vivian standing guard like she'd conquered enemy territory. But here's what she didn't know. While she was building walls, I'd already bought the key to her front door. Vivian didn't waste time celebrating her steel fence victory. Within 48 hours, she filed an emergency injunction claiming my cattle posed imminent health threats to 200 families. The courthouse paperwork smelled like fresh toner and desperation, a scent I was getting uncomfortably familiar with. Her secret weapon? Dr. Bradley Ashworth, environmental consultant who conveniently shared her last name and her talent for creative writing. 20 pages of preliminary assessment of livestock contamination risks materialized faster than most people write grocery lists. Pure fiction dressed up in scientific language, claiming my cattle were leaching E. coli into groundwater that county testing had proven cleaner than Denver municipal supplies. But Vivian's real masterstroke was hiring Blackstone Security Services. 2 guards in tactical gear now patrolled my fence line 24/7, boots crunching on gravel like some kind of suburban military occupation. Because nothing says reasonable HOA enforcement like treating a cattle ranch like a maximum security prison. "Mr. Steele," Miguel, the apologetic day shift guard, explained during one of our awkward conversations, "we're just doing our job. Ms. Ashworth pays us overtime to document any suspicious agricultural activities." The poor guy looked embarrassed, like he knew this was ridiculous but needed the paycheck to support his family. The social media blitzkrieg came next. #Meadowbrook safety hashtags proliferated across Facebook like digital cancer. Photos of my cattle drinking from the creek, the same creek that had watered livestock since Eisenhower was president, were captioned "Environmental Disaster in Progress" and "Our Children's Health at Risk." Neighbors who'd bought my beef for years suddenly developed selective blindness at the grocery store. The cheerful morning chatter from the school bus stop turned awkward and quiet whenever I drove past. Even my veterinarian, Dr. Morrison, mentioned that some clients were asking if ranch contamination might affect their pets. Local Channel 7 took Vivian's bait hook, line, and sinker. Ranch operation threatens suburban community ran during prime time, complete with dramatic shots of my completely ordinary cattle doing completely ordinary cattle things. Vivian appeared wearing her concerned citizen mask, standing in front of my fence like she was reporting from Chernobyl. "We're not anti-agriculture," she lied with Academy Award smoothness. "But public safety must come first when innocent families are at risk." That's when I decided to get serious about research. The courthouse basement became my second home, surrounded by filing cabinets that hadn't been organized since the Carter administration. The musty smell of decades-old documents mixed with bitter coffee from a vending machine that probably predated my grandfather. Hours of digging through property records taught me something Sarah used to say about reading medical insurance fine print. The devil's always in the details, and the details are always buried where nobody wants to look. Turns out easement law is full of surprises for people who actually bother to read the contracts. Frank Mueller's 1962 property agreement was a masterpiece of rural common sense. When the subdivision developer needed access to the main road, Frank didn't just grant permission, he negotiated operational control over their entire entrance system. The legal language was poetry. Said easement holder shall maintain exclusive authority over gate mechanism operation, including access scheduling, maintenance protocols, and security procedures. Every morning commute, every evening return, every pizza delivery in Meadowbrook Estates legally required permission from whoever owned Frank's property, which was now me. A yellowed newspaper clipping tucked into Frank's property folder revealed the beautiful irony. Subdivision uses cost-saving single-entrance design. The 1962 developer had bragged about cutting infrastructure costs 30% by funneling 200 homes through one choke point instead of building multiple access roads. That cost-cutting decision had created the perfect legal trap, and Vivian had walked right into it. But here's where things got really interesting. While documenting her harassment campaign for my attorney, I noticed something Vivian hadn't considered. Every complaint she filed actually strengthened my position by creating official documentation of the subdivision's dependency on agricultural operations that predated their residential zoning. The county had classified Meadowbrook Estates as rural residential, specifically because of my ranch's agricultural status. I remembered reading somewhere that without active farming operations, Developments like this get reclassified as high-density residential, which triggers massive property tax increases. A quick call to the county assessor confirmed my suspicion. 340% tax hike for every homeowner if agricultural operations ceased. Vivian was accidentally building my defense case while trying to destroy me. Miguel started sharing interesting observations during his lonely night shifts. Ms. Ashworth keeps asking about alternative entrance options and emergency access routes, he mentioned one evening. She seems real worried about something but won't say what. Keeps driving around the perimeter like she's looking for another way in. I smiled, feeling the weight of the brass gate key in my pocket. Smart woman, wrong conclusion. Let her keep worrying. Soon she'd have much bigger problems than finding alternative entrances. Vivian escalated faster than a rocket launch. Within a week, she'd transformed my peaceful ranch into the center of a bureaucratic hurricane that would have impressed a Soviet commissar. Security cameras sprouted around my fence perimeter like electronic mushrooms, their red recording lights blinking accusingly at my cattle. The soft whirring of motorized lenses tracking my every movement created a soundtrack of paranoia. My border collie Rex started barking at the cameras like they were mechanical intruders, which honestly they were. Then came the violation blitzkrieg. 47 separate infractions in 2 weeks, each carrying a $500 daily fine. Grass too tall in the northeast pasture. Vehicles improperly parked on my own driveway. Noise ordinance violations for roosters crowing at dawn. Apparently my chickens hadn't received the subdivision's quiet hours memo. My personal favorite was the citation for unsightly agricultural equipment storage, referring to my grandfather's 1952 John Deere tractor. That machine had been sitting in the exact same spot since Eisenhower was president, but suddenly it was an eyesore threatening property values. The metallic taste of rage mixed with the bitter irony of being fined for owning farm equipment on a farm. The accumulated penalties totaled $23,500 and climbing, threatening a property lien that could force a sale. Vivian had weaponized bureaucracy with surgical precision. The health department inspection arrived unannounced on a Tuesday morning, led by a nervous inspector who clearly preferred checking restaurant kitchens to cattle operations. Behind him trailed Vivian and 2 clipboard-wielding assistants, documenting every blade of grass like crime scene investigators processing a murder. "This is completely absurd," Dr. Morrison muttered from her veterinary truck, watching the inspection circus unfold. "Your operation exceeds every health standard in the county. Those cattle are probably cleaner than most subdivision hot tubs." But absurd was Vivian's specialty. She'd carpet-bombed every government agency from the EPA to the State Agriculture Board with complaints. Each agency required separate inspections, legal responses, and mounting attorney fees that were draining my bank account like a punctured water tank. The media campaign intensified daily. Vivian appeared on 3 different news programs, each time wearing a fresh, concerned mother outfit, but delivering identical rehearsed lines about protecting innocent families from agricultural contamination. She'd hired a professional photographer to create a visual narrative of rural menace that turned ordinary farm life into something resembling a zombie apocalypse. That's when Miguel started sharing the really valuable intelligence. During his midnight shifts, he'd been watching Vivian conduct her own reconnaissance missions, driving slowly around the subdivision perimeter with contractor blueprints spread across her BMW's leather dashboard. "She's obsessed with finding alternate routes," he confided one evening, the smell of his thermos coffee mixing with the night air. "Keeps muttering about emergency exits and infrastructure independence. Last week she brought some surveyor to measure the back property lines with one of those laser things. The pieces clicked together like a safe combination, finally finding its sequence." Vivian wasn't just harassing me, she was desperately searching for a way to eliminate the subdivision's dependence on my property. She sensed something was wrong with their access situation but couldn't identify the exact vulnerability. Years ago, Sarah had given me a property law textbook after we'd had our own boundary dispute with a neighbor. I'd learned that subdivisions built during the 1960s development boom often contained unusual easement arrangements that modern lawyers didn't fully understand. Back then, rural handshake deals and common-sense agreements governed property relationships, long before armies of attorneys turned every transaction into a legal battlefield requiring team captains and referees. My research into county traffic engineering records revealed the beautiful truth. Meadowbrook Estates had exactly 0 approved secondary access points. Fire department protocols listed only one response route, Emergency medical services had filed formal complaints about the subdivision's single point of failure design. Even the Postal Service had protested the access limitations, calling it operationally inefficient and potentially dangerous. But here's where Vivian's investigation team made their crucial mistake. Her private detective had discovered my purchase of Frank's property and flagged the suspicious timing of buying land during our conflict. The investigation report focused on my motivations while completely overlooking the operational rights buried in 6 decades of legal paperwork. She knew I'd outbid her for Frank's land. She suspected I was planning retaliation, but she had no clue I was already holding the master key to her entire subdivision's daily existence. That evening's news featured another Vivian performance, standing heroically in front of the subdivision entrance sign like a general rallying her troops. "We will not be intimidated by agricultural bullying tactics," she declared with the fervor of someone defending democracy itself. This community deserves protection from outdated rural interests threatening our modern lifestyle. From my kitchen window, I watched her BMW cruise past my fence for the 3rd time that day, her silhouette hunched over engineering diagrams like a general studying battle plans. The harder she searched for alternatives, the more she proved my control was absolute. Vivian's desperation transformed into something more dangerous: creative destruction. By month 3, she'd abandoned legal niceties and embraced the scorched earth tactics that had probably terrorized corporate boardrooms from Denver to Dallas. The morning I discovered contractors digging trenches along the subdivision's back perimeter, the smell of diesel exhaust mixed with the earthy scent of violated soil. Their excavator clawed at protected wetlands with mechanical violence, supposedly installing upgraded drainage systems for resident safety. My border collie Rex started howling at the machinery like it was murdering his favorite squirrels, which, given the environmental damage, wasn't far from accurate. Miguel approached during his lunch break, hard hat perched on his sweaty forehead, the metallic taste of concern evident in his voice. "Mr. Steele, those aren't drainage ditches. I've worked enough construction to recognize road preparation. She's building a secret back entrance." The audacity was breathtaking. Vivian was attempting to construct an unauthorized access road through federally protected wetlands without permits, environmental studies, or county approval. Her contractors were slicing through conservation easements that had protected migrating bird habitat since the Nixon administration. But here's where her legal training failed her. Environmental law doesn't care how expensive your lawyer is. I'd learned plenty about wetland protection during Sarah's volunteer work with the Colorado Wildlife Federation. Federal wetland violations can trigger criminal penalties, not just fines, the kind of charges that make corporate lawyers very nervous about their professional licenses. One anonymous tip to the county environmental office later, and Vivian's illegal construction project faced the wrath of bureaucratic justice. The inspector arrived in a Prius like an avenging environmental angel, armed with citation books thicker than phone directories. Within 2 hours, the excavation was shut down with enough violations to decorate a Christmas tree. $47,000 in federal fines for wetland destruction, unauthorized excavation, and disturbing protected habitat during peak nesting season. The look on Vivian's face when she received the citations was pure panic mixed with the dawning realization that she'd just committed multiple felonies while trying to solve a problem she couldn't even identify. That evening brought direct financial warfare. Property liens materialized on my ranch for accumulated HOA violations, now totaling $67,500 in manufactured penalties. Her legal team filed motions claiming my agricultural operation constituted a public nuisance requiring immediate abatement through forced sale. The psychological pressure intensified like a slowly tightening vice. She'd organized safety patrols of subdivision residents who drove past my fence at all hours, photographing everything from cattle positions to visitor license plates. The constant surveillance created an atmosphere of suburban East German surveillance that would have impressed the Stasi. Dr. Morrison mentioned that clients were asking if ranch contamination might affect their pets. Jake at the feed store reported subdivision residents pressuring him to stop serving environmentally dangerous operations. The social isolation campaign was working. Neighbors who'd bought my beef for years now crossed streets to avoid conversation. Vivian's propaganda masterpiece was the Meadowbrook Community Safety Coalition website. professional marketing presenting my 60-year family agricultural operation as an imminent threat to civilized society. Aerial photos labeled my pastures as contamination source and health hazard zone, with the graphic design sophistication of a disaster movie poster. The site featured a countdown timer to their emergency HOA meeting, where they'd vote on final measures for community protection. The agenda included forcing ranch closure through eminent domain and authorizing whatever legal action necessary to eliminate agricultural threats. That's when I decided to inspect my real weapon. Late one evening, I walked the perimeter of Frank's property, my property, studying the gate mechanism that controlled everything Vivian held dear. The cool night air carried the sound of sprinkler systems and garage doors throughout the subdivision, the gentle hum of suburban routines that depended entirely on my cooperation. The original 1962 installation was elegantly simple, a manual override system hidden in an underground utility chamber, controlled by a single brass key that Frank had passed to me like a family heirloom. The subdivision's fancy electronic gate was just expensive window dressing. The real power lay in that hidden manual system that could lock or unlock access regardless of modern electronics. Frank had shown me this mechanism years ago during one of our property line conversations, back when it seemed like interesting historical trivia rather than strategic nuclear arsenal. Standing there in the darkness, I could see lights burning in subdivision windows, families having dinner, kids doing homework, neighbors living comfortable lives while their elected representative waged a war that was about to backfire spectacularly. The brass key felt warm in my palm, smoothed by 6 decades of use. Such a small piece of metal to control so many lives, so many daily routines, so many assumptions about suburban independence. Vivian's BMW cruised past on another reconnaissance mission, her silhouette hunched over aerial maps like a general planning the Normandy invasion. She'd driven herself into obsessive frenzy trying to solve a puzzle she didn't know existed. Time to give her the education she'd been asking for. That night, I finally opened Frank Mueller's complete property files, the thick manila folder I'd been saving like vintage bourbon for the perfect moment. The musty smell of decades-old papers mixed with the lingering aroma of Frank's pipe tobacco still clinging to the documents. Inside was 60 years of legal documentation that would make Vivian's worst nightmares look like pleasant bedtime stories. The original 1962 subdivision development agreement read like a contract written by someone who understood the difference between cooperation and surrender. When developers needed access to the main county road, Frank hadn't just rolled over. He'd negotiated like a man who knew his land's true value. The language was poetry disguised as legal text. Easement holder shall maintain perpetual and exclusive authority over all vehicular access gate operations, including but not limited to scheduling, maintenance, security protocols, and emergency procedures for the Meadowbrook Estates residential development. Every morning latte run, every evening wine pickup, every teenage pizza delivery, every ambulance response, all legally subject to my approval as Frank's successor. The sweet irony tasted better than Sarah's homemade apple pie. Frank's handwritten maintenance logs, kept with German precision for 6 decades, revealed the subdivision's Achilles heel. The fancy electronic gate system was just expensive makeup applied over the original manual controls. When electronics failed, and they always failed, everything reverted to the brass key system that now lived in my pocket like a tiny scepter. County traffic engineering records painted an even more devastating picture. Meadowbrook Estates existed as a single-access residential development, specifically because Frank's easement agreement had guaranteed perpetual cooperation. No alternate routes had ever been planned, approved, or legally possible. The fire chief's file contained increasingly frustrated memos about response limitations. Single-point access creates unacceptable emergency service delays, one report stated. Recommend immediate development of secondary access routes. Except secondary routes required my permission, which nobody had bothered to request. During Sarah's years volunteering with the County Planning Commission, she'd brought home stories about developments that lost their controlled access status. Property values collapsed overnight when exclusive communities became isolated subdivisions with limited emergency access. Insurance companies treated single-access developments like flood zones, high risk, high premium, hard to sell. Vivian's environmental destruction wasn't just illegal, it was completely futile. Frank's easement gave me veto power over any alternate access, regardless of where she tried to build roads. She was frantically digging escape tunnels from a prison where I held all the keys. The financial implications were breathtaking. Meadowbrook Estates marketed itself as an exclusive gated community with controlled access and rural privacy. Without my cooperation, that marketing became false advertising. Properties would lose their premium pricing, HOA fees would skyrocket to cover increased insurance costs, and mortgage companies might require reclassification. But here's the most beautiful irony. Vivian's own harassment campaign had documented the subdivision's complete dependency on my agricultural operation. Every complaint created official records proving residential development was secondary to agricultural use that predated their zoning by 4 decades. The county's 1985 planning letter, buried deep in Frank's files, spelled it out clearly. Continuation of agricultural operations on the Steele family ranch is essential to maintaining the rural character designation that allows Meadowbrook Estates to operate under current zoning classifications. And Vivian wasn't just attacking her neighbor, she was accidentally sabotaging the legal foundation that made her real estate investments profitable. Every move she made strengthened my position while weakening her own. The brass key felt warm against my palm, smoothed by Frank's fingers and now mine. Such a small piece of metal to control such enormous consequences. Frank had understood something modern developers missed. Real power isn't about building bigger walls. It's about controlling who gets to pass through the gates. Tomorrow, Vivian would learn the difference between thinking you have power and actually holding it. The next morning, I walked Frank's property like a general surveying his battlefield, boots crunching on frost-covered grass that sparkled in the early sunlight. The underground utility chamber housing the manual gate controls sat hidden beneath an innocuous concrete cover, camouflaged among legitimate electrical connections, like a secret weapon disguised as suburban infrastructure. Frank's maintenance manual, written in his meticulous German script, smelled faintly of machine oil and decades of careful handling. Every component of the brass key system was documented with engineering precision that would have impressed a Swiss watchmaker. Turn clockwise to lock the gate closed, counterclockwise to restore normal operation. Simple mechanics that had outlasted 3 generations of electronic upgrades. The beauty was in its elegant simplicity. No computers to crash, no circuits to fry, no passwords to forget. Just mechanical precision engineered to survive longer than the subdivision it controlled. I spent hours studying traffic patterns like a wildlife biologist tracking migration routes. Morning rush hour peaked between 6:45 and 8:15 a.m., 200 vehicles flowing through the single entrance in a predictable ballet of suburban routine. Coffee shop runs, school drop-offs, commuter trains that waited for no one. Rex had developed his own traffic analysis, barking precisely 30 seconds before the morning rush began, as if he could smell the approaching anxiety of subdivision residents racing against their schedules. Evening waves crested from 5:30 to 7 o'clock p.m., with secondary pulses during soccer practice pickups and grocery emergencies. These weren't just commuters, they were prisoners of convenience, completely dependent on smooth access to maintain their precisely choreographed suburban lives. Martha, my attorney, had quietly assembled our legal arsenal while Vivian fought her publicity war. The documentation folders stacked on her conference table like ammunition for a legal siege. Original easement agreements, county traffic studies, emergency protocols, and 60 years of property records establishing my unshakable authority. Garrett, she explained over coffee that tasted like impending vindication, her harassment campaign has become our greatest asset. Every frivolous complaint creates official documentation of her retaliation against legitimate property rights. She's building our case while trying to destroy you. Years ago, Sarah had taught me that the most effective protests weren't the loudest ones. They were the ones that forced people to experience uncomfortable truths they'd rather ignore. My demonstration would be a masterclass in strategic inconvenience. We'd prepared a comprehensive media presentation, aerial photos revealing the single-access choke point, county engineering reports documenting emergency service nightmares, financial analyses showing property value dependencies, and historical records proving agricultural operations predated suburban dreams by 4 decades. Martha had contacted investigative reporter Sarah Tatum from Channel 9, whose HOA corruption exposés had earned state journalism awards and several death threats from angry board members. Tatum specialized in suburban power abuse stories that resonated far beyond local boundaries. "This hits every hot button," Tatum explained during our preliminary interview, her camera operator testing angles from Frank's property. Rural-suburban conflict, environmental fraud, property rights, HOA overreach, it's a perfect storm of issues that'll trend statewide. The timing required surgical precision. Vivian's emergency meeting was Thursday at 7 p.m., deliberately scheduled when working families would be stuck in traffic or feeding children. She'd planned her final power grab for maximum attendance from retired investor allies and minimum opposition from actual residents. But Thursday's traffic would be more problematic than usual. The demonstration plan was elegantly simple. Activate manual override at exactly 6:30 p.m. during peak evening commute, locking the gate for precisely 30 minutes. Long enough to create educational traffic backup, short enough to avoid genuine hardship. Emergency vehicles would still access through county roads, but subdivision residents would experience firsthand what dependency actually meant. Miguel continued providing invaluable intelligence about Vivian's deteriorating mental state. She's been calling private security companies about enhanced perimeter defense, he reported. Talking about hiring armed contractors to secure critical infrastructure. Yesterday, I caught her measuring the fence height with a tape measure like she's planning some kind of escape route. The woman was unraveling faster than a cheap sweater. Media coordination fell into place like puzzle pieces finding their perfect positions. Tatum's camera crew would document the traffic backup from public roads, while Martha's legal team provided expert commentary at the HOA meeting about easement law and property rights that most homeowners had never considered. County officials appreciated the educational value of highlighting infrastructure vulnerabilities they'd complained about for years. Even the fire chief grudgingly admitted that residents needed to understand their emergency access limitations. Dr. Morrison organized veterinary professionals to speak about agricultural heritage, while Jake rallied local business owners who depended on maintaining rural character in an increasingly suburban landscape. The brass key sat on my kitchen counter like Excalibur waiting for the chosen moment, its worn metal surface reflecting morning sunlight that seemed to whisper promises of justice. Thursday evening would teach 200 families what their HOA president had risked while trying to eliminate the neighbor who controlled their daily existence. Vivian's final week of freedom became a symphony of self-destruction that would have impressed a Greek tragedy playwright. With her illegal wetland excavation shut down and federal environmental charges pending, she embraced tactics that made her previous harassment look like gentle, neighborly suggestions. Tuesday morning brought the grinding sound of heavy machinery again, but this time she'd hired contractors to install enhanced security infrastructure along the main road. Concrete barriers rose like suburban fortifications, while steel vehicle checkpoints sprouted near the entrance like mechanical mushrooms after rain. The irony was delicious. Vivian was spending her dwindling resources fortifying an entrance she didn't actually control. Miguel watched the installation with professional bewilderment, his morning coffee growing cold as he observed the futility. Mr. Steele, she's building checkpoints and visitor screening stations, talking about controlled access protocols and threat assessment procedures. Yesterday she asked me if we should install razor wire. The smell of wet concrete mixed with the bitter scent of desperation as contractors installed barriers that would become useless the moment I turned a brass key in an underground chamber Vivian had never discovered. Her financial assault escalated to kamikaze levels. Property liens now totaled $89,000 in accumulated violations, while her legal team filed 17 separate motions demanding immediate ranch closure for ongoing agricultural terrorism. The metallic taste of injustice mixed with the sweet anticipation of approaching vindication. But Wednesday brought her most spectacular miscalculation, hiring 3 separate private investigation firms to conduct comprehensive threat assessments of my background, finances, and personal relationships. The investigators were so obvious they might as well have worn "Spy for Hire" t-shirts. One PI approached my elderly neighbor asking about my suspicious nighttime activities, meaning my evening cattle checks. Another tried interviewing Dr. Morrison about my psychological stability following spousal death. The third made a fatal error, photographing mail in my roadside box. That's when Detective Ray Morrison, Dr. Morrison's cousin and county sheriff's investigator, received a very interesting call from federal postal inspectors about mail tampering violations. Turns out Vivian's private investigator had committed a federal crime while looking for leverage against me. The federal investigation that followed was like watching dominoes fall in slow motion. Mail tampering led to surveillance of Vivian's communications, which revealed the bribery attempts. which uncovered the environmental fraud, which exposed the financial crimes funding her harassment campaign. Sarah had always said that criminals usually catch themselves by trying too hard to be clever. Detective Morrison shared some fascinating details during our coffee shop conversation, the aroma of justice mixing with freshly ground beans. She's violated so many federal laws we've stopped counting. Mail crimes, environmental violations, harassment, stalking, bribery, conspiracy. This woman's built a criminal enterprise around eliminating your ranch. Federal investigators had obtained warrants for her electronic communications, discovering text messages that read like confessions to organized crime. One message to her contractor brother-in-law: "Do whatever it takes to eliminate the ranch operation. I'll cover legal costs when we get caught." Another to her investment partner: "Property values will increase 40% once we remove the agricultural nuisance. Current legal expenses are just business investments." Most damaging was her text to the private investigator: "Find criminal evidence or create compromising situations. Everyone has weaknesses. Exploit whatever you discover to force the rancher out." But here's where Vivian made her final fatal mistake. She'd been secretly recording HOA meetings to document her heroic efforts to protect community safety. Those recordings captured her discussing bribery, environmental fraud, and conspiracy to commit various federal crimes. When Detective Morrison played back her own words during the federal interview, Vivian realized she'd created a comprehensive audio confession to multiple felonies while trying to document her victimhood. Thursday morning arrived with autumn air that tasted like approaching justice and the metallic scent of consequences finally catching up to suburban entitlement. Vivian's emergency HOA meeting was scheduled for 7 p.m., but the real education would begin 30 minutes earlier. Federal agents had coordinated with local law enforcement to serve arrest warrants during the HOA meeting for maximum legal impact. Vivian would face charges including mail tampering, environmental fraud, bribery, harassment, conspiracy, and violation of federal wetland protection laws. The investigation had revealed $347,000 in personal debt funding her anti-ranch crusade, with credit cards maxed to pay lawyers, investigators, and security contractors. Her real estate investment strategy had devolved into a gambling addiction powered by borrowed money and suburban privilege. Detective Morrison's final update carried the satisfied tone of justice properly served. She'll face federal charges that could result in 15 years prison time and complete financial ruin. Her own recordings provided evidence for every crime we suspected. As evening approached, I prepared for a demonstration that would prove educational for everyone involved. Rex sat beside me with the patient attention of a border collie who understands that some lessons require practical experience rather than theoretical explanation. Tonight, Vivian would learn that the power she thought she wielded was always an illusion, while the power she'd tried to eliminate was absolutely real. Thursday afternoon brought the final act of Vivian's suburban opera, complete with desperate arias and a crescendo that would have made Wagner proud. Federal arrest warrants had been issued, but she remained blissfully unaware that her evening HOA meeting would become a very different kind of performance. The last 24 hours had revealed the true extent of her desperation. Miguel reported that she'd spent the previous night personally patrolling the subdivision perimeter with night vision goggles purchased from a military surplus store, muttering about agricultural infiltration and securing critical choke points. The sweet smell of autumn leaves mixed with the acrid scent of Vivian's burning bridges as word leaked about federal investigations into HOA corruption. Several board members had quietly resigned, distancing themselves from what one called Vivian's increasingly unhinged anti-ranch crusade. Her final gambit was a media blitz that backfired spectacularly. She'd hired a Denver public relations firm to organize a press conference titled "Suburban Families Under Agricultural Attack," complete with professional backdrop and prepared talking points about environmental terrorism by rural extremists. The press conference attracted exactly 3 reporters, one from a suburban weekly newspaper, one blogger who specialized in HOA drama, and investigative journalist Sarah Tatum, who attended specifically to document Vivian's meltdown for her upcoming exposé. Chen described the event as watching a woman publicly destroy her own credibility in real time. Vivian's prepared remarks included accusations that I was weaponizing livestock against innocent families, and demands for federal intervention to protect suburban communities from agricultural warfare. The questions from reporters revealed how completely she'd lost perspective. When asked for evidence of actual health threats, she produced photos of cattle drinking from the creek, the same creek that had provided clean water for 80 years. When pressed about the wetland destruction, she claimed, "Environmental regulations are tools of rural oppression designed to prevent suburban progress." But her masterpiece was demanding that county commissioners declare agricultural operations incompatible with modern residential development and grant her emergency authority to eliminate rural threats to suburban security. The metallic taste of secondhand embarrassment filled the air as even her own hired PR consultant tried to redirect the conversation toward more rational talking points. Vivian ignored the guidance, doubling down on increasingly paranoid accusations that painted my family's three-generation ranch as some kind of terrorist training facility. That afternoon, she organized what she called a community defense assembly in the subdivision's clubhouse. Flyers promised final solutions to agricultural threats and legal strategies for permanent ranch elimination. The dramatic language attracted attention from federal investigators monitoring her communications for potential domestic terrorism implications. Miguel infiltrated the meeting, reporting that attendance was embarrassingly sparse, 12 people in a room designed for 200. Most were Vivian's real estate investment partners, increasingly nervous about their financial exposure in her legal battles. The meeting devolved into financial planning for scenarios that included my arrest, federal seizure of ranch property, and emergency relocation of subdivision residents if agricultural attacks escalated. Vivian had prepared evacuation routes, temporary housing arrangements, and legal strategies for claiming refugee status from rural harassment. The paranoid fantasies would have been entertaining if they weren't so pathetically desperate. Detective Morrison's surveillance team documented the meeting, adding conspiracy charges to Vivian's expanding federal case. Her own words, recorded by federal investigators, included discussions of eliminating the agricultural threat through whatever means necessary, and coordinating community defense against rural terrorism. But the real revelation came when Miguel discovered Vivian's escape plan. She'd rented a storage unit filled with packed belongings, purchased a plane ticket to Costa Rica under a false name, and liquidated her investment accounts to fund her flight from federal prosecution. She planned to trigger her emergency HOA powers during Thursday's meeting, force an immediate vote declaring my ranch a clear and present danger, then disappear before arrest warrants could be served. The beautiful irony was that she'd planned her escape for exactly when my gate demonstration would trap every subdivision resident, including herself, behind locked entrance barriers. As 6:30 p.m. approached, I walked to Frank's property carrying the brass key that would transform Vivian's final power grab into a practical lesson about who actually controlled access in Meadowbrook Estates. The underground chamber felt cool against my palm as I inserted the key into the manual override mechanism. Rex followed me with the patient attention of a border collie who understands that some education requires hands-on demonstration rather than theoretical explanation. County police were positioned throughout the area, federal agents waited in unmarked vehicles, and Sarah Tatum's camera crew had established strategic positions to document what promised to be the most educational HOA meeting in subdivision history. The brass key turned with mechanical precision that Frank would have appreciated. Electronic gate controls went dark as manual override engaged, locking the entrance in closed position just as evening commuters began their predictable journey home. Time to show Vivian what real power looked like. At exactly 6:30 p.m., I turned Frank's brass key clockwise in the underground chamber, feeling 60 years of mechanical precision engage with a satisfying metallic click that echoed like destiny finding its rhythm. The subdivision's main entrance gate didn't slam shut dramatically. It simply stopped responding to electronic signals and settled into locked position with the quiet authority of absolute control. Within minutes, the backup began. The first car reached the gate at 6:34 p.m., Dr. Jennifer Walsh returning from her pediatric practice, pressing the remote control with increasing frustration as nothing happened. Behind her, vehicles accumulated like suburban dominoes. Mercedes sedans, Tesla SUVs, pickup trucks, and minivans filled with soccer equipment and grocery bags. By 6:45 p.m., 47 cars stretched along the access road in a perfectly documented traffic jam that proved every resident's complete dependence on my cooperation. The sound of car horns mixed with confused conversations as neighbors stepped out to examine the mysteriously unresponsive gate. "What's wrong with this damn thing?" shouted Tom Bradley, subdivision board member, as he jabbed the call button repeatedly. The intercom remained silent because there was nobody to answer. The electronic system had been overridden by mechanical authority that predated their entire community. Sarah Tatum's camera crew captured everything from public roads, documenting the growing chaos with professional precision. The visual was perfect. Dozens of expensive vehicles trapped behind a gate controlled by the rancher their HOA had spent months trying to eliminate. At 7:00 p.m., Vivian's emergency meeting convened in the clubhouse with only 18 attendees. The rest were stuck outside in their cars, unable to access the parking lot. The bitter irony tasted sweeter than victory wine. Her final power grab was sabotaged by her own ignorance about who actually controlled subdivision access. Detective Morrison and federal agents positioned themselves near the clubhouse entrance, arrest warrants ready for optimal timing. The smell of autumn evening air mixed with diesel exhaust from idling vehicles and the electric tension of approaching justice. Inside the clubhouse, Vivian began her presentation about emergency measures for community protection, apparently unaware that half her audience was trapped outside and federal investigators were preparing to end her suburban reign of terror. At 7:15 p.m., I walked to the gate carrying Frank's original property deed and the brass key that had controlled subdivision access for 6 decades. County Traffic Engineer Bill Santos was already there, having been summoned by increasingly frantic residents demanding emergency access restoration. "Ladies and gentlemen," I announced to the crowd of trapped residents, my voice carrying clearly in the cool evening air. "I'm Garrett Steele, and I own the property that controls this gate through a legal easement established in 1962. The stunned silence was broken by Dr. Walsh. "You can't just lock us out of our own homes." I held up Frank's deed and the brass key, both glinting under the gate's security lights. "Actually, according to county records and this easement agreement, I can control access as needed to protect my property rights. The same property rights your HOA has been violating for 3 months. Engineer Santos confirmed my authority to the growing crowd. "Mr. Steele holds the original easement that grants operational control over this access system. The subdivision was approved with his family's cooperation, not their permission." At 7:20 p.m., I restored gate access with a simple counterclockwise turn of the brass key. The electronic system hummed back to life as trapped residents flowed through the entrance like water breaking through a dam, finally understanding their complete dependency on the neighbor they'd been trying to eliminate. But the real climax occurred inside the clubhouse, where Vivian was mid-sentence in her rant about agricultural terrorism when Detective Morrison interrupted with federal arrest warrants. "Vivian Ashworth, you're under arrest for mail tampering, environmental fraud, bribery, harassment, and conspiracy," Morrison announced as Sarah Tatum's cameras rolled. "You have the right to remain silent." The metallic click of handcuffs provided percussion for Vivian's shocked protests about rural conspiracies and federal overreach protecting agricultural terrorists. Her own recorded confessions had provided evidence for every charge, creating an airtight case built from her own paranoid documentation. As federal agents led her past the restored gate in handcuffs, residents who'd just experienced their access dependency firsthand watched their former HOA president face the consequences of her suburban tyranny campaign. Ellen Martinez, a retired teacher who'd opposed Vivian's harassment from the beginning, addressed the crowd that had gathered near the gate. "Maybe it's time we learned to be actual neighbors instead of entitled occupants." The applause that followed wasn't just for my demonstration. It was for the end of 3 months of manufactured conflict created by one woman's greed disguised as community concern. Standing beside the gate with Frank's brass key in my palm, I delivered the line that would make Sarah Tatum's evening broadcast. "Real power isn't about building higher fences to keep people out. It's about controlling the gates that let them in. And gates work both ways." 6 months later, the steel fence that had imprisoned my ranch was gone, replaced by a simple wooden rail fence that marked boundaries without declaring war. The sound of cattle moving freely between pastures mixed with children's laughter from the subdivision as neighbors rediscovered the rural charm they'd originally sought. Vivian's criminal trial became a masterclass in federal justice that attracted attention from property rights advocates nationwide. Convicted on 17 felonies, including environmental fraud, mail tampering, bribery, and conspiracy, she received a 4-year federal sentence plus $480,000 in restitution to HOA funds she'd embezzled for her personal legal crusade. Her real estate investment empire collapsed like a house of cards built on borrowed money and suburban entitlement. Foreclosure proceedings on her 4 subdivision properties provided affordable housing opportunities for young families who actually wanted to be part of a rural community. The new HOA board, led by Ellen Martinez, established governance policies that emphasized cooperation over coercion. Their first official act was creating the Steel Ranch Agricultural Preserve, ensuring permanent protection for ranch operations and preventing future harassment campaigns against legitimate agricultural activities. Federal investigators discovered that Vivian's harassment tactics weren't unique. She'd used similar strategies to eliminate undesirable property owners in 3 previous communities. Her conviction became a landmark case studied by property rights attorneys and used to prosecute HOA corruption throughout Colorado. The environmental damage from her illegal wetland excavation required $230,000 in restoration funded by her personal assets. The Clearwater Creek Habitat Recovery Project became a model for repairing suburban development damage, with my ranch providing educational tours for university environmental science programs. Miguel parted ways with private security to start his own landscape business, specializing in native plants and sustainable irrigation systems that complement rather than compete with agricultural operations. His daughter Sophia received the first Sarah Steele Memorial Agricultural Scholarship, covering full tuition for her agricultural engineering degree. Dr. Morrison and I married the following spring at a ceremony held on ranch property, surrounded by neighbors who'd learned the difference between community and control. She moved her veterinary practice to a clinic we built near the main gate, serving both ranch operations and subdivision pets with equal expertise. The gate itself became a symbol of cooperation rather than control. Frank's original brass key was displayed in a place of honor at the Community Welcome Center we established on his former property, with historical displays explaining easement law and agricultural heritage protection for visitors and new residents. Property values throughout Meadowbrook Estates increased 15% after the conflict resolution, driven by positive media coverage about rural-suburban cooperation and the elimination of HOA corruption. Real estate marketing now emphasizes authentic agricultural community and protected rural character as premium features rather than problems to eliminate. Sarah Tatum's investigative series won a state journalism award and sparked legislative reforms requiring HOA financial transparency and limiting enforcement powers over pre-existing agricultural operations. The Vivian laws now protect property owners from harassment campaigns disguised as community improvement. Rex, now joined by a second border collie named Frank, serves as unofficial ambassador for ranch tours that educate children about sustainable agriculture and property rights. Local schools bring students to learn about cattle care, environmental stewardship, and the legal frameworks that protect both rural heritage and suburban development. The annual Heritage Gate Festival celebrated its first anniversary last month with over 2,000 visitors enjoying local food vendors, agricultural demonstrations, and presentations about rural-suburban cooperation. Proceeds fund scholarships for agricultural students and habitat restoration projects throughout Clearwater Valley. But the most meaningful transformation happened at the personal level. Neighbors who'd avoided me during Vivian's campaign now stop for conversations about cattle prices, weather patterns, and the simple pleasures of rural life that originally attracted them to Meadowbrook Estates. The brass key sits on my kitchen counter now, no longer a weapon, but a reminder that real community strength comes from respecting what existed before us while building something better for those who come after.
Images Vivian faced when she realized the ranchers she's been tormenting for months was holding the case for her entire subdivision the whole time. What I love about Gary's story isn't the revenge, it's the return. This man has the power to shut down 200 homes permanently, but he chose education over distraction. 30 minutes of traffic backup taught more lessons than 3 months of legal battles. Vivian threw everything at him: $80,000 steel fences, federal investigation, environment fraud, private detectives. She turned his grief into a weapon against him, but every move she made was building Gary's defense case without her knowing. The real genius. While she was desperately searching for alternate routes that didn't exist, Garrett was quietly documenting her federal crimes. She recording her own confession, thinking she was building evidence against him. We all met Vivian, right? People mistake position for power, who think volume beats substance. They count on you being too tired, too scared, to descend to fight back properly. But here's what Frank Miller, Brass K really represent. Sometimes the most powerful response to aggression is just knowing exactly what you control. If this story crashes, that's justice H. Subscribe for more David versus Goliath victories. What is your move when someone tries to steal what rightfully yours? Let me know in the comment. Remember, the best lock are the ones that keep people out. They are the ones that remind people who hold the key. What is the move when someone tries to steal what rightfully yours? Let me know in the comments. Remember, the best lock are the ones that keep people out. They are the ones that remind people who hold the case. Thank you for watching.